So Death Battle is 10 years old now. Sounds like a good excuse to talk about one of my favorite shows on the internet. So what do I love about Death Battle? Well, I've always liked the idea of crossovers, as well as the versus aspect of the show being so intriguing to me, but it's mainly all the kick-ass fights presented in each episode. Needless to say, my 14-year-old self enjoyed every second of it when he was first introduced to it by a friend of his. Eventually, I went on to watch all the episodes in the series, a task that was way easier to do then than it is now, holy shit. So why I'm doing a list on Season 2 first rather than Season 1 is because the latter has not aged well in most aspects, and I don't think it's fair to rank them based on today's standards. While some aspects of Season 2 haven't aged well either, there's enough that still holds up to this very day that justifies me wanting to do this list. Plus, I'd rather talk about the season that was ongoing when I first got into Death Battle back in January 2015 anyway, especially since some of my favorite episodes in the series came from Season 2 in particular. Maybe I'll do Season 1 eventually, but I wouldn't count on it. For now at least, here's my top 5. If this is your first exposure to Death Battle, I want you to know that I'll be spoiling the outcomes of every fight that happens in the season. I'll have a playlist linked in the description below so you can pause the video and check them out, and we can see if your thoughts mirror mine. You can also just watch the ones you care about if watching all of them is too daunting. If you are familiar with these episodes already, just know that these are not ranked objectively worst to best, but rather my least favorite to favorite based on my opinion, and I'd like to know what your opinions are in contrast to mine. Without further ado, let's get started. You know, I really did try to justify to myself that this doesn't belong at the very bottom of the list, but it does. Beast vs. Goliath is just bad. It's not among the lowest lows in the series, but it's still pretty bad. Problem number 1, and you're going to notice this as a theme throughout the list, is the length of the animation. It is only 1 minute and 48 seconds long, and the fight doesn't even start until 36 seconds in, so it's really just a minute long. If that wasn't bad enough, hardly anything of substance even happens in the fight, which is the problem with making short fights like this. There was Beast throwing a van at Goliath, sure, but it was just lame. Problem number 2, the way these characters are portrayed. Yeah, these two have a more ferocious side to them, but that's all we see in this fight. They can have intellect while in a fight, but all we're hearing from either combatant is growling monster noises with just 2 lines of dialogue in the whole fight. Goliath especially sounds genuinely terrifying and not like himself. I will give credit where it's due though, the animation quality is pretty good despite the animator not even having the assets to get started when this fight was first announced, which leads me to my next problem. This fight was clearly rushed. If you watched this episode when it first came out like I did, Goliath's ability screen was blank and there was no fight graphic. Guys, you're not supposed to do that until 4 years later! Finally, while the death itself was cool, it also loses points in the fact that it happens out of nowhere. What I mean is, Beast breaks through the front of the van and out of nowhere, there is Goliath, about to pin him down and finish him off, not even a minute into the fight. It really just felt like everyone involved wanted to get this over with so they could move on to the next fight, which is a shame since I was looking forward to this after all the other fights that had come out since I started watching had been really good. Honestly, you're better off skipping this one since it's literally sandwiched between 2 amazing episodes. Here's hoping Gargoyles returns in the future and gets a fight better than this one. Beast vs. Goliath was really the only episode from the season that I can definitively call bad. Truth be told, it takes a lot for me to consider an episode bad. That said though, there's still a few episodes I consider to be very mediocre. Honestly, what do I even say about Ivy vs. Orchid? The analysis did get a chuckle out of me, but I can't guarantee that I did that at every pervert joke though, since those usually get pretty old fast to me. The fight animation was It's really short, only being a minute long, though it did have the scene with the two revealing their breasts to each other, which was pretty funny. Other than that, there's really no substance to it, not being helped by the Killer Instinct announcer not shutting up, which takes me out of the action. I will say though, the Ultra combo was okay and the death at the end was cool, which does keep this from being inherently bad in my eyes. Even then, the rest of the animation, I found myself bored while watching, so I can't really call it any better than mediocre. Don't have any more to say on this one. Moving on. Okay, show of hands. Who actually remembered Fulgor vs. Sector existed before watching this video? Just a few hands? I thought so. Honestly, I felt this fight was slow and boring. There are some moments I like though, like the combo breaker and how it was animated, and this particular shot of the rockets was pretty cool. Other than that, I can't get myself to be invested in this fight, and even when I could, it's almost over because of it only being a minute long. Oh, and the Killer Instinct announcer is back and doesn't shut up. I wouldn't mind it at all if this was in-game, but this is a fight animation. Callbacks are nice, but at least trim it down to just combo breaker. This is something I feel all the later KI fights improved upon, with the only thing the announcer says in those fights being... Speaking of combos, this has to be the most underwhelming Ultra combo in the whole series. All of Fulgor's movements just feel weak, and it's hard to feel the impact of it even being an Ultra combo. Even the Devastation Beam has no build-up before it was fired. He just fires it immediately after getting one last hit in. What keeps this from being bad is, well, there were some cool moments I liked as I stated earlier, and I guess the ending doesn't come out of nowhere? Still, just like Ivy vs. Orchid before it, it's very mediocre. Enough said. Oh boy, here we go. This season, we have gotten 4 controversial episodes. Why they are considered that way is because of the general reaction to their verdicts. While I have a hard time agreeing with 2 of them, it's fair to say that I actually enjoyed each and every one of them despite their problems. That is, all but 1. So, Goku vs. Superman 2. The animation quality is awesome, the choreography is awesome, there's some visually stunning scenes in the fight overall, the voice acting for both Lawrence Simpson and Michael Aggresso as Goku and Superman respectively is great, and Alive, being the first custom track Brandon Yates composed for Death Battle, is actually quite the banger. So why don't I like this episode? Well, there's a few big things that hold it back for me. First off, it's the fact that this fight really had no purpose. See? Back in January 2013 was the original Goku vs. Superman, the finale of Season 1, and it was awesome. The verdict I felt was accurate and well explained, Limitless Superman aside though. With this, however, Superman won again, and regardless of how you felt about how well the verdict was explained last time, I felt that it was poorly explained here. I'm not saying I disagree with the verdict, but there really should have been less of an emphasis on Limitless Superman. It felt like they did that instead of comparing their stats like last time in the post-analysis so it would have a different identity from its predecessor. I know they said that Goku's limits were difficult to pinpoint at the time, but that just means the fight was done too early. Which is actually my second point. Dragon Ball Super had only just begun to air episodes sometime after this was announced, as well as the fact that there was a recent outcry on Majin Buu, another Dragon Ball character by the way, losing his fight at the end of the previous year, which is a nice segue into my final point. The whole episode can feel like spite towards Goku and anyone who wanted him to have a second chance, especially with the killing blow in the scene with King Kai afterwards. I almost don't blame the fact that there was a lot of salt. I don't know if this will be a take that most people will agree with, but if the killing blow had been less tame than a simple lobotomy, hell, maybe if Superman was pushed to his limit so he'd use the super flare as the killing blow, which would make sense since they dedicated 30 seconds to talking about it, by the way, then maybe the whole thing would feel less like a spit in the face to Goku than what we ultimately got. Even then, it would still be pretty similar to its predecessor and circles back to the point where this just didn't need to exist. It also didn't need to be the fight that would line up with SGC, their old gaming convention. The fight's good, but everything else pulled it back for me, so I really can't put it any higher than this. Pray we don't get Goku vs. Superman 3 anytime soon. I'll be honest, I was expecting to put this one higher than I did. Fox vs. Bucky had some good moments, don't get me wrong. The dogfight between the Arwing and the Righteous Indignation was pretty cool with the dialogue using the Star Fox interface. Bucky constantly stomping on Fox as he tries using Firefox was pretty funny to me, and I liked the death at the end. The rest of the fight, however, felt kinda slow. Hardly anything had any impact to me whatsoever. It doesn't pick up for me until Fox loses his bionic legs, which I guess was another cool moment. Really, the problem I have with this one is that hardly anything in the fight stood out to me, which is why I can only say that this is okay. That's all I have to say on this one. Moving on. When I first noticed that Batman was in 2 death battles instead of just one like everyone else was at the time, I thought it was pretty dumb. Honestly, I'm really not a fan of returning combatants. I can make exceptions if they return with a better matchup than where they were before, or if it's an all-around better fight. I don't know if I can make an exception for this one, though. Did Captain America have better opponents back then? Maybe. Honestly, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing him return since this fight ended up just being okay. Batman vs. Captain America had good animation quality, and it was pretty fast-paced, and I think that's why it's better than the other 1-minute long fights in the season. For what little Zack had to work with for his first animation for the show, he did a pretty good job. The main problem is that, again, it's a minute long, and I've already explained my grievances with that. Death was unique, though, and was memorable for being the only time in the series someone got hung so far. Not much else to say on this one, just give me Batman vs. Spider-Man over this any day. When I first started watching Death Battle, this was the most recent episode. I actually considered it to be my favorite out of all the ones I had watched at the time. As time went on, I liked it less and less, and now I just think it's decent. Ragna vs. Soul Bad Guy was a pretty kick-ass fight for what it was worth. Good animation, good pacing, and Black Beast vs. True Gear 4 was pretty awesome. Sure, it's another vaporization death, but god damn it, it looked really cool. I'm also gonna bring attention to the analysis because Soul Bad Guy's rundown has what I consider to be the best joke in the entire series, and that would be the who's on first style argument about Batman's name. Yes, there's a Guilty Gear character whose name is actually that man. I find myself laughing at it every time I rewatch the episode, and I've never even watched Who's on First, although maybe I should. On the other side of things though, Ragna's rundown had a theme where hardly anything in BlazBlue was explained in the form of Wiz constantly saying no one knows. I've never played BlazBlue myself, but here, let me play this clip.
Things took a darker turn when Ragna's sister Saya grew very sick.
With what?
Sickness? No one knows.
It literally says right there that Saya has a fever, you dunce. Over time, I've realized how much it sullied the overall experience of the episode for me. I know that Nick Kramer, the writer for this episode, got very frustrated trying to understand what was going on in BlazBlue, and it bled into the script, but still. The fight isn't perfect either. It's pretty short, only being 2 minutes long, and this close-up of Ragna looks out of place with everything. Overall, I still like this episode, just not enough to call it good though. I was initially thinking that this one was just decent too. Turns out, I think it's pretty good. That being said, Shao Kahn vs. M. Bison can feel pretty repetitive at times, with Kahn spamming the shoulder charge for example. Also, obligatory fight as short comment goes here. Even with all that said, I still like this fight. The animation is pretty good, and so is the pacing. The ending with Bison's soul getting devoured was also pretty cool. I really like how satisfying the sound design is for when the Psycho Crusher and Nightmare Booster are used, which makes me wish Final Bison wasn't as underutilized as he was. While I did criticize the shoulder spam earlier, there are rewatches where I find ironic entertainment in that it's something Khan does in various Mortal Kombat games, even if I've never played any of them. Also, this is the only episode to date to have an official alternate ending, and it's pretty funny. You do have to have a first membership to view it though. Finally, there's Boomstick doing a parody on Captain Planet's theme song in the analysis, and it's all about Bison. It's one of the better jokes in the series in my opinion, and there's even a full version of it hidden after the credits. Overall, good episode. Nothing more, nothing less. I saw this one requested a lot and wasn't sure if they could make a fight between archers that entertaining. Considering where we are on the list, I guess I was proven wrong? Green Arrow vs. Hawkeye I've always thought was pretty good. The animation quality was great and the pacing was good too. The clever use of the acid arrow always stuck out to me as a cool moment. While the dialogue is just voice clips taken from other sources, they still made for good banter. Green Arrow especially has lines that I absolutely enjoy listening to, especially the boxing glove era ringtone gag. You Have Failed the City, while it is my least favorite of the original tracks in this season, I still thought it was good, though it had to grow on me first. It was pretty disappointing that it wasn't in much of the fight and the version used was the instrumental version. Really, what keeps this from getting any higher is that I just didn't think it was that good. Also, look, one arrow is 2 pixels wide and the other is just 1. Gee, I wonder which one is going to pierce through the other. The fight graphic appearing when it did also kinda bothered me, probably why they got rid of it in Season 6. So overall, good fight, just not that good. Is this fight accurate? Unsure, but I'm honestly leaning towards no on this one, especially with the wonky reasoning. Even if I end up full-on disagreeing, let it not be said that I didn't enjoy Gaara vs. Toph. I'll acknowledge that parts of the animation lack polish, especially in the last 30 seconds, but there's still a charm in the animation quality that makes it good in my eyes. The fight had a pretty good pace to it overall. Gaara's Sandwave, for example, gave me chills, and ignoring that she might not be able to do this in the first place, Toph breaking out of the sand burial was pretty badass. As for the voice acting, Chris Guerrero did an alright job voicing Gaara, but Kira Buckland was on point here, as she sounded almost exactly like Toph. She could honestly make for a good voice double for Jessie Flower. The banter in the fight was also good and fun to listen to. Yeah, the pacing does slow down a bit to focus more on it rather than the actual fighting, but I actually didn't mind it much at all. I'm willing to acknowledge that I'm probably in the minority when it comes to that, as well as the fact that I liked the off-screen death. I felt it was pretty cool and unique, and I thought it fit well into the fight and made sense to do it. If there was one thing I was disappointed by, it was that Gaara had never used his gold dust once in the fight since they talked about how it's a notable part of his arsenal in the analysis. Still, despite the obvious problems, it's a down-to-earth fight that I'll be happy to come back to every once in a while. What? I had to get one Earth pun in there. Also, Boomstick's fallout at the end result was hilarious. So, giant mech fights. There are 4 of them in the entire series. While the 3D ones from later seasons were pretty awesome, let's talk about the one that came first. For being the only 2D giant mech fight in the series, Tiger Zord vs. Gundam Epyon was actually pretty good. I'll certainly watch any of the other giant mech fights in the series over this, but it was still fun to come back to. It's pretty fast-paced and exciting at the beginning, though it doesn't really go back to that after Zex, Epyon's pilot, gets a hallucination where he sees himself losing. It's still good enough though to make me say, hey, that wasn't below average. As for the voice acting, Kurbafur as Tommy, Tiger Zord's pilot, and Electric Star as Saba, the Sword Tommy Wheels, both sounded fine. And then there's Stuart Schlomach as Zex. I don't mean to insult the guy since I'm sure he's done great in other works, but he just does not sound right as Zex at all. A few of his lines sounded fine, sure, but then there was his scream in the hallucination. It just sounded so off. Not the worst voice acting in the series, but still. At least the dialogue was good and made for some fun banter. The setup before the fight proper, though, felt like it kinda dragged on for a while. It makes up a whole minute and 30 seconds of the animation, and it can actually get kinda boring. Even despite the negatives, the fight itself was good, though I can't really place it any higher than this. Also, that sick explosion, yo. Oh look, the other controversial fight with the verdict I question. Okay, but really, I actually enjoyed Yang vs. Tifa. I will say though, both models have issues and it's all in the hair. Yang's cannot stay still for the life of it, and Tifa's just looks off in every way. This is also the first 3D death battle to use cell shading, and while it can look weird at times, it's not something I mind too much, especially since it actually looks fine most of the time. The fight itself was fast-paced and exciting too, and there's plenty of references to both of their franchises. Yang got the Shadow People at the beginning of the animation and her theme playing for the second half of the fight, and Tifa got this scene as a reference to Advent Children as well as the Limit Break interface. Callbacks to the franchises the combatants in question are from are always nice. Almost. I also want to bring attention to the recurring joke in Tifa's rundown, since Boomstick faking us out and making us think he was going to comment on her breast is funny as hell. I said earlier that I usually dislike pervert jokes, but this is one I can make an exception for since it's not as in-your-face about it as many other jokes of its kind are. The voice acting is pretty good too, with Barbara Duckelman reprising Yang, and unsurprisingly, doing a good job. Tia Ballard, while not exactly sounding like Tifa, I think she sounded fine overall. And now for the elephant in the room, the verdict and the Ruby promotion at the end. I already implied earlier that I don't necessarily agree with Yang winning this fight, but I think it's more incompetence rather than bias or anything corporate. However, the Vital Festival poster appearing when it did kinda rubs me in the wrong way, since it can actually make the whole episode feel like a Ruby advertisement and nothing more. I personally think Ruby's a great show, and this fight's announcement at the end of the last episode got me into it. It's a shame that time constraints got in the way, so they weren't able to advertise Volume 3 in a way that seems less corporate than it actually was. Oh well, even in spite of that, this is still a fun fight that I'll enjoy coming back to. If you're using process of elimination, then you now know which is my favorite of the 2013 episodes. But yeah, Ryu Hayabusa vs Strider Hiryu is good. I'd say it's great, but it's short. Aside from the length, what do I like about this fight? Well, it's fairly fast-paced, and I like how both characters are using damn near everything in their arsenals throughout the fight. I especially like Strider's robotic animals charging at Ryu as he just destroys all of them single-handedly, and the one-strike duel at the end being an homage to Ninja Gaiden. Best part about it is that it is not the finisher, but rather an opening that would be used for the finisher, and it was awesome. Kinda wish more one-strike duels in the series did that, but oh well. Really, what puts it down here is that it just doesn't have the extra something special that brought other fights to greatness, or even amazingness. Still though, it was worth seeing the battle between Dragon Falcon and Flying Dragon once more. There's only one word I can use to describe what this fight is to me. Nostalgic. Luigi vs. Tails was one of the first death battles I ever watched, and I fell in love with it. Even watching it now, 6 years later, I still think it's great. Everything in it, to me, invokes nostalgia. The sprites, all the assets, the sound effects, including the voice clips for both Luigi and Tails, you name it. It gives off a certain classic charm that no other fight has ever tried to replicate. Some of the sound effects in particular hail from Smash 64, and while I've never played that game myself, I've heard its sound effects used in other videos before and liked hearing them, so hearing them here was a nice treat. Nostalgia alone isn't what put this up here, as it's also just a genuinely good fight. Both characters use a good chunk of their abilities, and it's nice to see how they interact with one another. The camera also takes full advantage of the 3D environment, and it's really cool to see. Sure, there are some problems like how the negative zone was handled in the fight, and the explanation for Tails winning was kinda piss poor. Still, this was just an all-around fun fight. This was also one of the first death battle episodes I ever watched. Funny how it ended up being back-to-back with another, both in release order and on this list. I'm probably biased as a hardcore Pokemon fan, but the research presented here in the Pokemon Battle Royale was on point. Really, I find it hard to disagree with this one, and this is coming from someone whose favorite Kanto starter is the one who died first, and is also the one they actually managed to make me feel bad for. Seriously, poor Venusaur. But yeah, the fight itself is great. Had a lot of cool moments, like the Solar Beam and Flamethrower Beam struggle, for example. It's also cool seeing all the different abilities used in the fight interacting with one another, as well as the fact that I find some enjoyment seeing all the Pokemon acting like wild animals, since the context is that they're wild Pokemon. This, however, also led to the deaths being kinda brutal, a warning that I don't know is fair anymore since I already showed you Venusaur's. As for how Charizard died, Blastoise clearly sent him to DeviantArt, and he didn't like that, so he exploded. I don't know if the enjoyment I felt watching that is ironic or not. The analysis is home to what I consider to be the second best joke in the series in the form of Boomstick's theory on how Blastoise came to exist, and it's absolutely glorious. Too bad I can't call it the best joke considering that man exists. You know who I'm talking about. Overall, I'm glad this was one of the first episodes in this series I've ever come across, as I still think it's great to this day. Anyone ever wished you could see two losers fight to the death to see who's the better loser? Well, now you can. Okay, that's not actually the context in the fight itself, but clearly the team wanted to know who the better loser was. Hercule Satan versus Dan Hibiki is how you portray both characters as jokes and do it effectively. Considering who these two are, we're not getting an intense fight, but holy hell is it enjoyable nonetheless. Every gag played here is absolutely glorious in my eyes, from Dan charging his Gadoken for so long only for it to do jack shit to the absolute hilarity that is the jetpack scene. The animation taking a more cartoonish style absolutely fits here like a damn glove. If that isn't good enough, then the fact that this is 6 minutes long certainly will be. It didn't need to be that long, but I'm glad it was. Something else that helps the fight is the voice acting. Both Alejandro Saab and Brad Venable, rest in peace, as Hercule and Dan respectively, did fantastically. Nick Kramer also did a good job as the MC during the fight. While the gags in the fight were cool and all, I also want to bring up Dan using the Raging Demon actually giving off chills unironically. I actually had a dream the night before the fight came out where Dan actually won with it, and it ended up being more chilling there than it was here. Only because it succeeded in my dream, while here it was a complete failure. Probably the only time I will ever feel any sort of intimidation from goddamn Dan Hibiki. Also, he didn't actually win. Big sad. To think I used to not like this fight all that much before. Revisiting it now, it's an absolutely fun watch throughout. I wonder if Dan's ever gonna do something impressive, though. I was on vacation at Deep Creek Lake when Dr. Doom's preview came out, and it had a sneak peek of the fight in it. One of the more memorable parts of my time there, if I do say so myself. I can still remember it fondly because Darth Vader vs. Dr. Doom ended up being really good in my eyes. It's really fast-paced, especially at the beginning with Vader fighting against a Doombot instead of the real Dr. Doom himself, and the animation quality's great to boot. I especially liked Vader throwing around the Doombot around with the Force and even making him hit the camera. The broken TIE fighter getting blocked by the real Doom's shield was also pretty cool with the sound design and the camera shaking. While it can be hard to see Vader during the first half of the fight, it's still pretty easy to tell where he is, and also, what's going on. He does become much easier to see once Doom takes the fight to the past, though. I have mixed feelings about the death, by the way. On one hand, it's funny seeing Vader dying by lava given his past experiences with that substance. On another, it's an environmental kill, and it absolutely rubs me in the wrong way in that aspect. Still made for a cool climax though, and the big no in the aftermath was just priceless. I do have some nitpicks in the analysis, like how the Doombot explanation was included in his backstory instead of his abilities. The footage they used even had him wearing the mask he clearly hasn't donned at that point in the story. Still, this is a great fight worth watching, and while Mally hasn't done any more animations for Death Battle since this fight, it's easy to say that he went out with a bang. So here we have another revisit to a previous fight, but unlike Goku vs. Superman 2, this had a purpose to it. To commemorate how far the team has come within the past 4 years, not to emphasize a point that was made just fine a few years back. But most importantly, to dedicate to Montiom, someone who has helped the team in many different ways, but sadly, passed away from a severe allergic reaction on February 1st, 2015. Well, let's talk about the fight now. The remastered Boba Fett vs. Samus Aran was awesome. For one, the graphics look absolutely stunning. It's one of the best looking 3D animations in the show to date. The fight itself is also great with both characters using a good amount of their abilities in their arsenals and being very fast paced throughout. Even Zero Suit Samus gets a chance to shine, especially in that cool as hell lightsaber duel, even though Samus is supposed to have a whip made of plasma and not a lightsaber. Oh well, still made for a cool action sequence. Being a remastering though, a lot of things were kept the same, like the setup of the fight and the killing blow. Even some of the jokes from the original's analysis were reused here, but not only was all of it done better here, but also paired to something that looks to be aging like a fine wine as opposed to the original, which aged like milk. Seriously, this was a great fight. Makes me wonder why it's so slept on. My only complaint is that sometime after the fight came out, the audio in the last minute of the fight was watered down, and the music in the dance scene at the credits meant to commemorate Montiom was removed due to copyright. It's a damn shame too, since it was a great tribute. Still, I'm glad this fight exists, especially since the original is hard to go back to at this point. Just wish copyright didn't screw it over. And here we have what I consider to be the best of the 2013 episodes of Season 2, as well as my second favorite premiere in the series. How did it manage to get up this high? I don't know. 80s magic. No, seriously, He-Man vs. Lion-O was written like it came straight out of the 80s, and it's glorious. Sure, neither franchise is very interesting to my 2000s kid mind, but it's still hard to look at this fight and call it any less than awesome, especially in the writing department. It's like an official crossover between He-Man and Thundercats actually happened back then. Even the voice acting sells the 80s atmosphere of the fight. Both Edwin Tiong as He-Man and Xander Mobus as Lion-O were essentially on point with every line they deliver. Fun fact about Xander Mobus, by the way, he was in 4 episodes this season, and down the line you'll hear me praising his work in those episodes too. Oh, and the animation is good as well. Some of the goofier looking motions in the fight actually work in its favor because of the matchup's equally goofy nature. And there's also parts that are actually well animated. The moments where they're actually fighting were good too. And quite easily, the best part was He-Man throwing a whole ass mountain into the air and at Lion-O, only for him to pulverize it. Eat your heart out, She-Ra versus Wonder Woman. Your pillars, trees, and invisible jets ain't got nothing on the mountains He-Man's throwing around. Oh, and also, He-Man powering through the Eye of Thundera was cool too. Really, between all that and everything being so 80s, you have yourself a wonderful episode. What an awesome start to an equally awesome season. So I have the premiere and the finale back to back on this list. I swear I did not intend to do that. Pokemon vs. Digimon. God, that is such a dumb name. Hold on, let me try that again. Red and Charizard vs. Tai and Agumon was a fight that I never knew I wanted, but I'm glad to see happen, and as the season finale no less. I was actually expecting something like Galactus vs. Unicron to be the season finale since it was confirmed at a panel earlier in the year. I was a little disappointed that it wasn't. At first. I became hyped for this matchup since I was a huge Pokemon fan, and the first season of Digimon was something I really enjoyed as a kid. I ended up rewatching the whole thing in commemoration that this fight was happening and gained a new appreciation for it. And true to how I was as a 9-year-old, I did not watch the second season. I wanted to, but then decided against it. Oh well, didn't really need to do that to know that Charizard was going to die a horrible death. As would Red. And I'm gonna touch up on that later. For now, let's talk about the fight proper, and it is awesome. Just like Yang vs. Tifa before it, there is cell shading, but I'd argue that it looked great throughout the whole fight. Moments where it looked off were few and far between. Even all the models look good, though it's a little weird seeing Ty's model using a mouth that's a texture, but you get used to it. The action in the fight is awesome, and same with the animation quality, even if there are some parts that lack polish, especially with War Greymon's Digivolution lacking sound effects. I also really liked all the transformations going on in the fight and how it radically shifts the tide in their favor. As for the voice acting, Todd Haberkorn does okay as Ty, though Xander Mobus does an amazing job as Agumon in all his stronger forms. And then there's Nathan Sharp, who you might know as Nate Wants to Battle, as the voice of Red. His voice just screams Pokemon Trainer to me, and I think he did a wonderful job in that sense. He also did a custom track for the fight, and it slaps. It doesn't have an actual name, though. My favorite part of the fight is that you can see the bonds between trainer and monster on both sides, and it also highlights the clear difference between the relationships between human and Pokemon and human and Digimon. It's especially clear in the fight between Mega Charizard X and War Greymon, and I could very easily write an essay about all the subtle details in that part of the fight alone. I did originally do that in the script actually, but then it lengthened the segment out to 5 minutes long. However, let's just say it explains why Ty punches Red after the massive blast burn explosion, and could also explain why War Greymon went as far as to create the most brutal vaporization death in the entire series, as well as the most heartbreaking. Although, I never had any sentimental attachment to Red or Charizard, plus I expected Ty and Agumon to win anyway, so my only reaction really was just, oh my god, that was really brutal, holy shit! Watching this live was also pretty cool because look at that straw poll. It had a 1 vote difference, and it still amazes me to this day. If there was one thing that legitimately bothers me more than anything in this episode, they called Pokemon slaves unironically, and it was just cringe. One of the worst arguments they've ever used in a post-analysis for sure. Even still, god, what an amazing fight to come back to, and what a way to end the season. And to think this is only number 13. Can't believe there's 12 fights I think are better than this. I don't care if Chuck Norris is an outdated meme now, this fight is still awesome and it's still the best gag fight in the series. Chuck Norris vs. Segata Sanshiro, believe it or not, is actually still going on right now. We're just only able to see 3 minutes of it, plus a few more extra seconds seen in the aftermath of Naruto vs. Ichigo, as well as the constellation it created that is seen in many other episodes to show that they're still going even after all this time. Chuck does not want to buy a Sega Saturn, holy shit. While this fight didn't have an actual verdict, that's the point of it, and we need at least one fight that ends in a draw to be good, right? I mean, none of the other fights that end in a draw are even close to being good in my eyes. This fight has no competition in that regard whatsoever. The thing about Chuck Norris is that all the myths about him used in the fight unironically make it awesome and incredibly ridiculous. It also makes for some great action, made even better with the amazing animation quality. The sprites for both were altered versions of already existing sprites, and they both look great. Chuck's is a recolor of old Joseph Joestar, while Segata's was slightly edited from Takuma Sakazaki. Glad they went that route instead of placing their heads on top of Scott Pilgrim's sprites. Perhaps my favorite part of the fight is the escalation it takes from how it starts to how it ends. It starts in a cabin. It then gets destroyed. Same with the forest it was in. The mountain in the background receives the same treatment. Then the Earth is split in half. And the rest of the solar system is pretty much f***ed and it makes a black hole. Holy crap, it's all so good! Overall, there's a lot to appreciate in this episode, and it's a good time through and through. For as great as Luigi vs. Tails was, the verdict had the whole episode feel like an instance of different verse, same as the first. It was another Mario vs. Sonic episode where the Sonic character wins, since that's what happened in the original Mario vs. Sonic. With this episode, though, the opposite happened. Donkey Kong vs. Knuckles was another instance of a matchup I didn't know I wanted, but I'm glad to see it happen. But this is for a different reason. If Knuckles were to come to Death Battle, I figured they would put him against Wario, since that was the request I was seeing a lot. And then it was revealed that he was fighting Donkey Kong, and I began to realize that this was the better matchup for Knuckles, as the connections made a lot more sense and it was more thematic. Wario did end up fighting Knuckles in a 1-minute melee a few weeks later, though. I'm gonna address the elephant in the room first. DK sprites look bad. The rigging of it and the animation in general makes up for it in spades to the point where I actually don't even mind how bad it looks anymore. The fight itself is also fast-paced and intense, and it is a joy to watch. It also does a good job conveying how dumb these two can be. They clearly forget that they were even fighting when the minecart almost reaches the end of the unfinished tracks. The finisher was just from DK getting frustrated that Knuckles couldn't climb them both out of the ground. Though I never got why they tried a fake out on us after the fact, since we saw earlier that Knuckles was clearly dead. One last thing I want to mention is that it's impossible to talk about this fight without ever mentioning the greatest line Knuckles has and ever will say. Take it away.
Oh no! 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 Oh no!
My younger sibling and I memed the crap out of that line when we were younger, and we still do to this day. Hearing it used here, and amazingly too, it's one of my favorite parts of the fight, if not my favorite. That line will never get old to me anytime soon. Overall, this is my favorite Mario vs. Sonic themed episode in the series, as it was just amazing. Yes, this includes the 2018 remake of Mario vs. Sonic, by the way. This was actually in the top 10 for a while, and I would have loved to keep it there. There were just 10 fights I thought were better, though. 3D death battles have been a mainstay since 2012, although back then they were animated by Mr. Lang, someone who typically does sprite animation. This was the first episode to be animated by Torian, someone who typically does 3D animation. He left a really good first impression. I'll get this out of the way first. Many parts of Terminator vs. RoboCop haven't aged well. Specifically, the low-resolution buildings, the background glitching out at times, the models just looking off for trying to be realistic, and the lip-syncing on RoboCop was just non-existent. Everything else, however, still holds up to this day. The choreography, for one, is really awesome, and the action that goes along with it is just as good. I especially love the moment where RoboCop precisely aims his shots to plug Terminator's minigun to render it unusable. What I also love is the fact that the animation is 6.5 minutes long, so there's so much awesome fight to go through. If I named everything I liked about this episode, we'd be here forever. God, why don't we ever get fights this long very often anymore? Anyway, I also enjoy the voice acting here. Joe Gaudette does an amazing Arnold Schwarzenegger impression and fits well as the Terminator, though his "I'll be back" line at the end doesn't sound right. Xander Mobus is just as good as RoboCop and delivers some of his more badass quotes really well. I especially love "You're no longer under arrest" and "9 shots, you're out." His monologue about Terminator's crimes was also cool to listen to. He doesn't even care that he had just told him to f*** off. He just continues to burn him and even send him into a gas tank by way of a goddamn missile. While many parts of the animation continue to show their age, the parts that don't continue to shine through brilliantly and will hopefully ensure that an amazing fight such as this won't go to waste. I'll be honest, I thought this was going to be a 3D fight when it was first announced since I didn't think either combatant had any good sprites to work with. Holy hell was I glad to be proven wrong in one of the best ways possible. Man, I love this fight. Guts vs. Nightmare has to be one of my favorite sprite battles in the entire series. The animation quality here is so good! This was actually the first time I took note of the sprites being rigged in a way that has them in poses that aren't predetermined, and it all moves so fluently. I noticed this when I was watching this fight for the first time with a couple of friends, and one of them pointed out how good the animation looked during this scene in particular. This leads me to the dialogue of the fight, which is just voice clips taken from other sources. While Nightmare has significantly more lines, Guts provides some good banter to him as well, only because his voice clips are actually altered versions of Siegfried's from Soul Calibur. Now, back to the animation. How good it is in quality especially helps with how good the action is. I really like the part where Nightmare hits Guts into the air and hits him with a shockwave, sending him into a tree for example, and also the barrage of attacks Night Terror unleashes on him later. The two clashing swords at the beginning was also pretty awesome, mainly because of that really satisfying sound design. And then there's Night Terror's death with Guts jumping through the wall of fire he put up to cut his arm off, and then split his head in half with a stab, all to the beat of the music. Inferno showing up and Guts putting on the Berserker armor was also a really chilling moment, and the destruction of Soul Edge was just awesome. Although if I may say something, that's not actually Inferno, it's actually Cinder from Killer Instinct. Guess he just did not want to wait 2 to 3 years for his franchise to finally get a good fight, so he posed as another character in a fight that doesn't involve Killer Instinct whatsoever. And also, if I may complain for a bit, while I agree with the verdict overall, the explanation for Guts winning could have been explained much better. Talking about how Guts has fought other beings like Nightmare before would have been all fine and dandy if there were actually statistics shown for the demons he fights in contrast to Nightmare. Oh well, the fight's too awesome to let me care that much. An amazing battle between opposites for sure. Slow fights are usually pretty boring. When both characters aren't moving around a whole bunch or taking their sweet time to do anything, it can ruin the whole experience. This, however, is how you make a slow fight amazing. Being the second 3D animation Torian did for the show, various parts of Godzilla vs. Gamera didn't age very well either. The buildings in the background are sometimes not even in the correct layers in the animation. The water just looks awful, maybe even at the time, and most of the cuts between shots are awkward to watch. Considering where we are on the list though, you can guess that everything else makes up for all that. As I said in the beginning, the fight is slow, however it actually works in its favor considering who these two are, and it just excels in sheer spectacle because of it. I can't help but feel awe and sometimes even get teary-eyed when I rewatch this fight. The whole thing feels like it came straight out of a kaiju film, though I haven't watched any of them and don't plan to as of right now, but if anything shown in the analysis is anything to go off of, this fight does a pretty good job replicating them. They both use a great chunk of their abilities throughout the fight, and there's enough room for it too, since it's 6 minutes long. Perhaps the last minute of the fight or so is my favorite part, after both combatants have fallen into the water from space. I don't care if the effects used in this part are awkward now, the firing of the ultimate plasma mannequin, and god, that is such a mouthful, is freaking awesome and a sight to behold, and fits in well with the theme of this fight having such amazing spectacle. The red spiral ray Godzilla would use as the finisher was also really awesome. Man, that death just looks so satisfying. While the age in this fight shows, I really have a hard time calling this fight any less than amazing. Perhaps I should go out and watch a kaiju film one day. It was only last year when I learned that this fight was animated in the span of just 2 days. You know when you've knocked it out of the park when I couldn't even tell that was the case. This is a take I know most people will disagree with, but I've always loved Mega Man vs. Astro Boy. It was actually the matchup the friend that got me into the series wanted the most at the time, and got me sold on it as well. Needless to say, I was pretty excited that this was happening when it was first announced, and oh boy did it deliver! I'll get the negatives out of the way first. The majority of the setup before Mega Man shows up having no sound effects makes it pretty awkward to watch. The second and last negative is that a good amount of the sound effects don't sound like they're synced with the rest of the fight. Really, that's it. I don't have problems with the animation quality and always thought it was really good. The rigging on both Mega Man and Astro Boy look fantastic, and the action is fast-paced and super exciting to watch. Tell me that this scene in particular isn't just riveting and awesome. I love how both characters are using a vast majority of their arsenals, and Mega Man changing colors as he switches to a different weapon was a nice touch. I also just find enjoyment in seeing Astro Boy just dodging Mega Man's weaponry nonchalantly, or even catching it and throwing it back at him like if he was the most annoying thing to ever fight. There's also the aerial fight at the end with Astro fighting Mega Man in his Super Adapter form, which is another exciting sequence of the fight. Even the death was awesome, if only because of that satisfying sound design in the explosion. I also like how it makes you wonder for a few seconds about who had just exploded before Astro shows up to reclaim his head. Guess he took some semblance of damage when clearly punching Mega Man apart. Overall, why this fight is up so high on the list is because of how much excitement I get from watching it. Come to think of it, I wonder if Aquila did any more death battle animations in the future. Oh. I have seen various bits and pieces of Death Battle when I noticed some of my friends watching it before getting into it myself. Eventually, I decided to join them, and it was as that friend I mentioned in the last segment wanted to rewatch this episode. As a result, this was the first episode I have ever seen in one whole piece, and I never looked back. Fun fact, Kirby vs. Majin Buu is actually his favorite episode in the series to this day, although he did unsubscribe midway through Season 5 after the previous 2 seasons left a bad taste in his mouth. I don't blame him though, since even my all-time favorite episode actually comes from this season, but I digress. While this isn't my all-time favorite episode in the series, or even my favorite 2D episode in the season, let it not be said that this episode isn't amazing. There is a good mix of moments that make me chuckle like much of Fat Boo's dialogue, and moments that give me chills like Kid Buu tearing through a dimensional hole in the sky to escape Kirby's stomach. That scene never fails to give me goosebumps every time. The escalation this fight takes from something more goofy while Kirby is still fighting Fat Buu to something a lot darker and more serious when Kid Buu shows up is probably my favorite part of the whole fight. There's enough room for it to do it too, as the animation totals up to 6 minutes long. The animation quality is awesome too, despite the occasional hiccup, and the pacing is just as good. I also really like how expressive Kirby is throughout the fight, adding hand-drawn phases to his sprite and all that, and they still look great to this day. Various other Kirby enemies get the same treatment. While much of it is absent from when the fight takes the serious turn, it's substituted for amazing action and moments that give me chills. I've already touched up on the dimensional hole, but how about the planet burst? Holy shit, we really did come a long way from Boo picking a fight with Kirby because he ate the sweetified Kirby enemies. The whole of Popstar would have blown up with Kirby along with it at the end had Boo been declared the victor. Good thing he had the Hypernova fruit on him, am I right? I actually used to think it came out of left field, believe it or not, but now that I think about it, yeah, it makes sense. What is wrong, on the other hand, is them saying that Boo never fought someone who could move at light speed, which contradicts what they said almost 2 years ago about Goku being able to move over twice that fast. If there's another issue I have, much of the sound design is a few frames behind the animation. Despite these issues, this is easily the best of the controversial episodes and one of the best 2D episodes in the series. Also, the Funko Pop advertisement before the fight is the only ad in the series I never skip because it's hilarious. With Terminator vs. Robocop and Godzilla vs. Gamera, if I'm to recommend them to anyone who might be interested, I would go out of my way to warn them ahead of time that many aspects of them haven't withstood the test of time and just tell them to focus more on the actual fighting and choreography so they could get the most out of them. With this fight, however, despite using the exact same set as both of them, I don't feel the need to warn anyone about anything. Aside from a couple of nitpicks, Deadpool vs. Deathstroke still holds up to this day, with so much to love about it. Deadpool hijacking the analysis, for example, will never not be amazing. Until they brought him back for whatever reason. Twice. Yeah, there's no contest about which Deadpool episode is the best to me. Spoilers, it's this one. Right off the bat, the first thing that happens is the two shooting at each other rapid fire, but somehow every bullet from both sides only go as far as the direct middle, and it's amazing. There's plenty of moments like that given that the fight is 6 minutes long, but my favorite part is the absolute beauty that is the Deadpool dance scene, complete with a whole new outfit. Fun fact, that was not actually in the script, it was all something Torian decided to add himself, and it worked. Honestly, the whole appeal of the episode to me is all the humor that comes from Deadpool. Everything that comes out of his mouth is a joy to listen to. Taka knocked it out of the park with this performance, and it's quite easily some of the best voice acting in the series. Lord Jazer also does fantastically as Deathstroke, by the way. Deadpool alone didn't carry this episode to the number 5 spot though, as the fight is also very well choreographed, coupled with some great action. There's some genuinely awesome moments here, like what is quite possibly the biggest car crash I may ever bear witness to in my entire life, and the fact that they're still able to go at it even while standing on various airborne vehicles. Sure would have hated to be on that bridge while these two were fighting on it. It would also lead to my death since there was a giant explosion at the end. For as good as the fight was, my one complaint was that the finisher felt kinda weak. I don't know, the fact that the camera cut away at the last moment lessened the impact for me quite a bit, and Deathstroke's body falling never looked right to me. Still though, I've seen a lot of people consider this one of their favorites for a reason, and I'm inclined to agree. There's just 4 episodes I think are better though. For the longest time, this was the uncontested champion of 2D episodes in my mind. Almost 6 years after this came out though, something else would take that title, but this is still my favorite 2D episode of the season. God, there's a lot to love about Ryu vs. Scorpion. The animation quality is just amazing, and for being the first fight to feature hand-drawn close-ups of the characters, the transition between them and the sprites is just seamless, and they just look really good in general. I'd also like to mention that the fight is just fast-paced and exciting the whole way through. There's also a couple of chilling moments in there, like Scorpion dragging Ryu to the Netherrealm, for example. Or how about that fake out when all that was left of Scorpion after Ryu used the power of nothingness on him was just his skeleton, and then it just started moving out of nowhere. While it may have been obvious to some that Scorpion had essentially no soul that attack, that doesn't change the fact that it was one of the more chilling moments in the series, especially with the sound design. Honestly, when the fight is taken to the Netherrealm, that's when it gets really good in my opinion. The occasional rigging on Ryu's sprite when he's talking looks really good going back to the animation quality for a bit, and the action has a higher level of intensity here, especially amplified after evil Ryu shows up. Honestly, I just loved seeing the two trading blows until Ryu went back to normal, as there's a lot I could gush about in just that 1 minute of the animation alone. The fight's not the only thing that's great because the analysis has a good amount of memorable jokes, with the obvious highlight being the translation of Joden Sokutagari being "and diarrhea joke foot." Probably the 3rd best joke in the entire series in my opinion. My only complaint is that the glowing eyes on Ryu when he uses the power of nothingness look really dumb. It's such a derpy look on him, and you can especially see it when he deactivates it, and there's a much more serious look in his eyes. It's such a disconnect. Overall though, this episode was nothing short of amazing, and was actually in my top 3 for a while, but opinions have since changed, and the amazingness that is the next fight was just greater in my eyes. You f***ing knew this would be up here. Solid Snake vs. Sam Fisher very immediately became one of my favorite fights in the series when it first came out, and as you can tell, it's still up there. Everything about this fight is amazing. Almost. The rap music at the beginning doesn't really fit, but you get the point. The animation quality is amazing, it's 6 minutes long, and the pacing is just awesome. While they aren't just simply attacking each other 24/7 as both are stealth game characters, so there's elements of stealth showcased in the fight, it's all really good, and can actually feel cinematic. I've praised other fights where characters use a vast majority of their arsenals before, and it applies here too. Even the cardboard box makes an appearance, much to Otacon's dismay, and even some weaknesses on both sides are exploited. Oh yeah, both Snake and Sam have hackers assisting them throughout the fight too in the forms of Otacon and Grim respectively, and it just makes the fight that much better. This may actually be a good segue to talking about the voice acting. Ben Reynolds, Whitney Rogers, and Brad Venable all sounded on point when voicing Sam, Grim, and Otacon respectively, and then there's Chris Sabat as Solid Snake. He had always wanted to play that character, and clearly had been practicing his Solid Snake impression. I say that because when he got to play him in this fight, he was fantastic and basically just as on point as all the other voice actors here. Something else I like here is the fact that there's actually a bit of a story going on. Okay, more of a story than most other fights in this series, but you get it. There's an actual motive as to why the two are fighting, and it's all in that little flash drive with some data on it, and they both knew that only one can walk away with it. It just makes the fight that much more compelling. However, I can't talk about this fight without bringing up the last 2 minutes of the fight after Otacon hacks into the Paladin. Divine Identity starts playing as Grim realizes she's screwed and the lights in the hallway all go out, a moment that will never not give me goosebumps. What follows is, well, a chilling line from Snake and some darkness, and a badass knife fight. Holy shit, for as amazing as the rest of the fight was, this was easily the best part. The close quarters combat was really fast paced and kept me on my toes even when knowing who wins already, and how it ended, my god. Having Sam getting stabbed, tased, and then killed by his own knife while the data was still in the air was just the perfect way to end this fight. God, this fight is just a masterpiece. This could very objectively be number 1 on the list, but there's just 2 more fights that I like more. I wonder what the data was about, by the way. Hands down, the best Marvel vs. DC episode in the entire series. Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor was the first episode I was hyped for, and oh man did it deliver. Even rewatching it just a couple years ago, I ended up liking it even more than I used to. For starters, both models look absolutely gorgeous. Seriously, there's a lot of detail to them and the shine that comes off of them just looks amazing. And it's all even better with the animation quality being just as good. The voice acting is awesome too. Gianni Montegrano does a great job making Lex sound intimidating and cocky, and it works really well, and Jay Britton does just as well as Jarvis. Chuck Huber, being the first professional voice actor in Death Battle, was on point and sounded almost exactly like Robert Downey Jr. when voicing Iron Man. How about we touch up on the dialogue too, since it's also great. The banter between Tony and Lex is fun as hell to listen to, and even the various times Tony is butting heads with Jarvis back in the warehouse was also great. My favorite part about the banter is both times where Lex thinks he's won and drops one final line, only for Tony to come back with an all-new suit and reply to him. Thanks for the Suit was just beauty at its finest, but even that is essentially nothing compared to when he does this again, but with the Endosim armor, where he drops one of, if not, the single greatest line in the entire series. The rest of the monologue is great, but then there's I've been playing human. And then comes out some of the most exciting and best choreographed action in the whole series, where Tony starts beating the shit out of Lex. Seriously, just look at this and tell me that this isn't absolutely riveting! And also, this is the best vaporization death in the whole series, with so much satisfaction that comes from every bit of it. They made a vaporization death awesome. Let that sink in. Oh yeah, the action is something I should talk about, even though I just talked about my favorite part of the fight. Oh well, so it's all very fast-paced and exciting, and there's a bunch of explosions going on, as you should expect with these characters. There's also the fact that these two both get the upper hand at various parts in the fight, and leaves you wondering who could actually win at the end. It even keeps me on my toes even despite already knowing who wins. I've already talked about the Endosim armor segment, but the Hulkbuster breaking Lex's shield and the giant laser bomb Lex charges up and throws at him next was a very close second. The sound design and everything else I had already praised makes it that much better. You want to know what else is amazing? Over 5 minutes long, baby! This is in my top 3 across the whole series, and I was almost considering putting this at number 1 at some point, but when I rewatched what's already there, I knew there was only one answer as to what could be at the top spot. Season 2 was fantastic. It had overall increase in quality from Season 1, and the amount of fights that are still great to this day is plenty, and not far between at all, even surpassing Seasons 3 and 4. With that said, when I started working on this list, I knew there was only one fight that could be at number 1. There are arguments as to why other fights like Snake vs. Sam, Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor, or Deadpool vs. Deathstroke, just to name a few, should be at number 1 instead. But to me, this is the only fight worthy of the title of Best Episode of Season 2. Sweet mother of all that is holy, this fight was amazing. I'm just gonna go out and say it. Wolverine vs. Raiden has been my favorite episode of the series since the moment it ended on the livestream 5.5 years ago, and nothing has topped it since. Many fights have come close, but none could. To me, this is the purest example of what a good death battle is, and one that every episode should follow to eventually top it one day. Amazing animation, amazing effects, amazing sound design, fast-paced action, moments that give me chills, a phenomenal fight track, awesome voice acting. It's all here in one package, and the end result was a masterpiece. Honestly, I'm not even sure where to start with this one. Let's start with the matchup itself, something I haven't normally talked about on this list, but there's enough here that's noteworthy. I've seen a few requests with Wolverine and maybe Raiden, but never against each other. It was actually Torian who suggested the matchup when the team was trying to decide who Wolverine should fight, and it was pure genius. Not only did the two have a lot in common, but it's also so close that only one question could actually decide who would win, and it's whether or not Raiden could actually cut through Wolverine's adamantium skeleton or not. I guess we can add another matchup to the ones I didn't know I wanted, but was glad it happened. I also want to touch up on the effects because holy hell I love how much detail there is in all of them. It just makes the already amazing fight choreography that much better. There's also the fact that this is probably the goriest death battle in the season, right up to the death itself, and the fact that both are just covered with marks at the end, and I've always really loved how it looked. The scratch marks on Raiden look great with the rest of his model, and same with Wolverine, and that healing animation is just satisfying for whatever reason. And no, I don't care that his clothes are healing miraculously too. There's also some banter between the two that is all just a joy to listen to, complete with some amazing voice acting. Both Xander Mobus and Tim Page sounded on point with their roles as Wolverine and Raiden respectively. Now, did I also say there was a fight track? Oh yeah, I did, and it's an absolute bop. EXO is my favorite of the original tracks composed for this season, and better than everything composed for seasons 3 and 4 as well in my eyes. Or ears, I guess. I listened to that song on repeat so many times when it first came out, and I still go back to it every once in a while, and the 2019 remaster is just as awesome. Brandon Yates left some seriously good first impressions on me when I first heard his work here. And now to talk about my favorite part of the fight itself. Everything that happens after Wolverine goes Berserker Rage. Between cutting Raiden's arm off and then impaling him to it activating Jack the Ripper mode, none of it will ever not give me chills, and the fight afterwards was just epic. That fucking stare from Raiden, coupled with his pain "this is why I fight" line, the amount of chills I get from that scene alone is why it's my favorite moment in the whole series, even surpassing everything in the later seasons, and what helped to cement this whole fight at not just the top spot on this list, but also in the series as a whole. Who knows if there will ever be a death battle that will surpass this one in my eyes. Only time will tell, I suppose. Well, that concludes this list. I'd like to know what your thoughts were in the comments, as well as what your rankings would be. Till next time, when I'll possibly do the same thing, but with Season 3.